Welcome to another episode of The Plunge. And I'm so glad that NBA basketball is back. Like, it's been a long 7 days without actual basketball, but yeah, I'm glad it's back. A lot of games slated for the next couple of months up until May. It's going to be really an exciting time. I'm excited, but yeah, let's just start with the NFL first before we head into some basketball stuff. Tom Brady, he signs for 4 more years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming off his 7th Super Bowl win, I think. How steep of a decline do you envision Tom Brady during this contract?
Every year, I feel like I'm predicting his decline would eventually happen. And obviously last year, that wasn't really the case. I mean, he declined in a few areas, but he made up for that with just his mental toughness and his ability to win. But I cannot envision another 4 years where he plays as the top 10 quarterback in the league, because one, he'll be 50, or he'll be like 48 to 50 when this contract finishes. And two, it's just, you can spend a year with the team and their contract situations were all really good at the time when he signed there, and they just had a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, but things change, and that offensive line could go from great to not good really fast. And when you don't have a talented offensive line for a 46-year-old quarterback, you're not really in a position for success. So I think it was kind of a quick reaction move by the Bucs, because they won and they've never had this opportunity before as a football team. Or they did win once before, I think in 2003, but they had such a long era of just nothing to really celebrate as a fan base. So I think they'll regret this one in the long run. And I envision not this year, but the next year, Tom Brady turns into a lower tier quarterback in the NFL.
I think it's going to be a tough decision for players who are looking to play with him, because of course it depends on the personnel of the team and the wide receivers and, like you said, the offensive line. But when you're a player who wants to sign with the Buccaneers, you got to ask yourself, like, do I want to join a team who has a guy who's won 7 Super Bowls, or am I joining a team whose quarterback his age is getting up and possibly his style of play is declining? So I think it's a huge thing to wrestle out. I mean, I don't know. I think when he's 43, and that's pretty high up in age even for a quarterback. And even when you look at Drew Brees, he might retire pretty soon. And so I don't know. I think it will be a tough decision to get players to come to Tampa Bay, because it is kind of a big risk to play under a quarterback who is aging pretty up there now.
Yeah, it seems like one of those things where it's like, sure, it may be good for 2 years, but you're not trying to sign a long-term deal with the Buccaneers right now just because they're going to be such a different team 3 years from now, and they're probably not going to be in that championship conversation anymore. So moving on from that, we've had some NBA talk, especially around this trade deadline, and a lot of that's revolved around Kyle Lowry. So my question to you is, are you buying or selling Kyle Lowry's head to Philadelphia?
Well, I think I've seen headlines saying that the Raptors aren't planning to deal Lowry by the trade deadline. But, I mean, with that piece of news aside, from just my own perspective, going to Philadelphia is actually such a perfect fit for the team. But at the same time, if you're Philly, who can you give up for Kyle Lowry, right? Like, you got Thibault, Danny Green, maybe, I don't know, like Mike Scott. Like, I don't, like, if you're Philly, I don't really know if you can really piece the players together to trade for Lowry. I mean, from a basketball standpoint, it makes sense. Like, you have like a legit point guard who can actually shoot the ball compared to Ben Simmons. You have another good shooter who can space the floor. But I mean, if you're Philly, you have to look in the direction of even just more shooters, right? Like we said, JJ Redick would be a perfect fit for them. Gives them an extra shooter to space the floor with Simmons and Embiid clogging up the paint a lot. And I don't know if the headlines are are not here, that Lowry is tradable. I think I would buy that Lowry should be in Philadelphia. I think it's a better fit for him. He goes back home. He's in the latter years of his career, and it would be nice to see him win another chip.
Looking at this trade, it might make more sense than you kind of laid out before, just because Tyrese Maxey is also kind of an interesting piece from Philadelphia. I mean, he really excelled when they had a lot of COVID issues and he was playing big minutes, and the Raptors would be looking for his skill set to bring onto the team, where it's kind of like Fred VanVleet offers that steady yet consistently good scoring option for the Raptors, whereas they have Norman Powell, who's an explosive scorer, but Tyrese Maxey in the future could really grow with Fred VanVleet because he doesn't need to be a primary ball handler, and that's probably an option that the Raptors would look at. So you can piece together like a Tyrese Maxey, Matisse Thybulle, and a pick for Kyle Lowry.
Oh, maybe Shake Milton too.
Yeah, Shake Milton.
You got Shake Milton on.
I think you might be giving up too much at that point. I think it would probably be something like a Tyrese Maxey, Matisse Thybulle plus filler contracts and a pick. That would probably get it done for Philly. It just depends on how much they believe in the current roster, because Thybulle can be a really important piece in a playoff run just because you're going up against guys like Giannis and Jimmy Butler and all these guys who are quality small forwards to actually get to where you want to be. And of course, Brooklyn, like Matisse Thybulle is so useful in situations where you're dealing with Kyrie, you're dealing with James Harden. He can't quite guard Kevin Durant, but I don't think anyone can. So from that aspect, you have to weigh your options as Philly. I'm going to say a sell on this one as well, just because you would have to give up too many versatile and important pieces for your future to get this done as Philly. But Kyle Lowry belongs there. It's a really hard sell for me, but Kyle Lowry is such a great leader. It's just a little too much defensive versatility that you'd be giving up if you're Philly to get Kyle Lowry on your team.
Yeah, and like you said, there are so many teams in the East, like East contenders, that have multiple scorers, and especially the Nets, right? And you need to have a guy like Matisse Thybulle on your team who can guard basically 1 through 3. And you got Ben Simmons, who's an elite defender, and he's gonna have his hands tied with who knows, like Giannis, with James Harden, Kyrie Irving. You need that second guy, and that guy's Thybulle. So I think Thybulle is a more valuable piece than people actually think. I think we talked about him earlier in the pod, but how good of a defensive player he is. But yeah, the Tyrese Maxey part, I think, is a very interesting piece to this trade if he goes to Toronto, because he's a guy who kind of needs the ball, but he's that slasher mentality kind of guy, and I think he would fit well with VanVleet, because VanVleet's he's more of the playmaker point guard, and Maxey's more of the athletic, get to the hoop, like just get my shot kind of guy, like just plays his butt off, and he has the speed to do it. So I think Maxey would be a very good fit for the Raptors. But anything else on Kyle Lowry and just where his career is at, and what do you think is the best route for him to go, even beyond this season?
Unfortunately, it's time for Toronto to move on, because Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet play a very similar role on the team. And there's really little drop-off when they don't have Kyle out there, which is unfortunate because he's spent so much time with the team. But also, he probably deserves to go and chase another ring at this point, just because he's really given everything to Toronto that he can. And so they should be into rebuild mode. There are plenty of opportunities, actually, for Lowry, I think. Clippers number one destination, but just not really the pieces there to get it done. That would be an ideal spot for him. Even teams throughout the Western Conference, like a Denver, could really use a Kyle Lowry. I don't know how he would work with Luka, but I feel like they would figure it out so that they could play really well together in that Western Conference too. There are a lot of suitors for him. Philly makes the most sense in terms of he has a connection with the city. But they just don't. They have such a good thing rolling with their roster that to move on from Thibault, who, if you talk to Doc Rivers, like, you'll understand the importance of him to the team, because there's been countless interviews talking about how Matisse Thybulle, despite averaging 4 points per game, is so impactful when he's out there. And we talked about it, like guarding De'Aaron Fox. He can take on all those responsibilities. So, yeah, I think Kyle Lowry gets moved, but not to Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, his time is up in Toronto. Like, even when he was, I think when he was out with some sort of injury before the break, like, Powell started for the Raptors, and you know, it wasn't too bad of a combo, but like with Van Fleet and Powell, and they're actually playing pretty well. But yeah, I think his time is up in Toronto. So, moving on, Blake Griffin signs with the Brooklyn Nets. He reunites with DeAndre Jordan, which I think is a pretty underlined headline because that Lob City is reunited. But obviously, it's not what it was 5 years ago. Like, clearly, his athleticism is probably not there anymore. So, but with that being said, you still have a good, solid, smart player. Not too bad of a playmaker in the post. So are the Nets the most complete team in the NBA right now?
There are two different sides to this trade in terms of how fans perceive it. There's one side who says, oh my gosh, the Brooklyn Nets just got Blake Griffin. Like, wow, they have 4 All-Stars on their team now. And then there's a side of people who have watched Blake Griffin play in the last 2 years and realize that this might be a waste of a roster spot for Brooklyn, just because he has been so hard to watch on a Pistons team that has all the opportunity in the world. Like, sure, Jeremy Grant's broken out this year, but that team, you can take as many shots as you want on that Pistons team. And he was doing that, and he was turning over the ball. He was shooting almost only threes at some point throughout the season. I don't know. I don't think Blake plays a significant role for them, especially in the playoffs, just because he's kind of old, kind of slow. I'm curious to see if he'll start dunking again, though, just because he's been relegated to a role player now, whereas before he was like almost a primary ball handler on Detroit for so many years. And so it would be interesting to see if he catches a lob. I'm sure you'll see a lot of highlights if he catches a lob and dunks it. And like, when you brought up the fact that DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin are back together, I'd seen that before, but it's just such a different atmosphere around them, because there's no excitement to either of those players anymore when they used to be two of the most exciting players in the league. But Blake Griffin, yeah, I would say that Brooklyn is the most complete team in the NBA despite Blake Griffin, not because of Blake Griffin. But right now they have been, even defensively, they're getting back to kind of being a reasonable defensive team. So yeah, they're probably the most complete team without having Anthony Davis right now for the Lakers, just because they've been missing him for so long and they've kind of lost their identity halfway through this season.
Yeah. Could one speculate that Blake wasn't really trying at all during the first half of the season with the Pistons, knowing that he was going to get traded? And do you think because of that, you think he's actually going to try a bit harder now with the Nets, and he's actually going to dunk a couple of his shots?
I think he hasn't dunked since 2018, and so 2019. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So the year before, I mean, I'd watched him quite a bit just because he's been on and off my fantasy team and whatever. But even the year before, like, he was playing some. He was still kind of shut down because of his knee injury the year before, but he just looked terrible out there. Like, this is the most telling thing about his game and his decline is his post-ups are terrible now. Like, I'm telling you, when I'm watching these Pistons games, I would rather have Mason Plumlee down on the block posting up than Blake Griffin. And
he had like a couple triple doubles.
Yeah,
too
no
this
kidding.
season.
He's been those old Denver guys have been putting in some work for a terrible Pistons team. But yeah, I mean, Blake Griffin just doesn't bring a lot. Like, yeah, sometimes he'll shoot I think he shot 8 for 12 from 3 one game this season. That was his best game. But he's not a great shooter. He doesn't post up well anymore. Maybe he brings back some athleticism. I think that's the only kind of part of his game he could redeem with this team. Other than that, just doesn't bring defense, doesn't really bring a lot to the Brooklyn Nets at this point.
Like, would you at this point you would rather have Jeff Green on the floor other than Blake Griffin, in my opinion, because he's a bit more athletic. He can shoot the ball better, so he can space the floor better, right? Like, it's obvious that Jeff Green's probably the better player in this situation than Blake Griffin.
Yeah, especially because Jeff Green is not a drop-off from Blake defensively at all. Like, he's probably an upgrade, so I don't know. This situation for the Nets, I think the Nets are still looking to get that deal for Drummond done. Like, they're hoping that the Cavs eventually turn to buying Drummond out just because they can't match contracts with him. And if they get Drummond, then they are absolutely the most complete team in the NBA, and Drummond would be a big impact player for them just because of the difference that they could play an all guards lineup basically with KD at the center, or they could shift to a bigger lineup with KD at the small forward and Drummond at the center and Jeff Green at the 4. Like, whatever you would want to do with this roster, you could, and that would give them such an ability to make adjustments during a playoff series. So Drummond is the real key. Blake Griffin's just kind of a sideshow for this team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the highest ceiling you can get with Griffin is just him being able to dunk and just getting open because Harden, Kyrie, and KD just attract so much attention. But yeah, it's an interesting signing, but you got something wrong when we're watching Pistons game. Like, we're too into fantasy when we're watching Detroit Pistons games. Like, come on. But speaking of trades, the trade deadline is coming up on the 25th. So, what's on your mind about any kind of players that you have who you think should be traded to whatever team you think is the best fit for them?
My number one trade candidate would probably be Nikola Vucevic, just because he's on like a 3-year, $72 million contract. So he's making like $24 million a year, which is honestly pretty average, and it's underpaid for what he brings to the team. And it's going to be a situation where a lot of teams are going to be offering for him. Like, the value of Nikola Vucevic lies in the fact that he is kind of in the same role of a Sabonis or a Jokic, where, yeah, sure, maybe you don't have room for traditional bigs in today's game, but Vucevic has changed his game where he's a great passer. He's a good three-point shooter. He checked a lot of shots in that All-Star game from 3. And he's a very versatile player. He's not too poor on defense. Like, if you're looking at him, he fits perfectly with Boston. I don't know if they could get a deal done without including Brown, unfortunately. He fits great in Boston. He would fit great in a place like, honestly, he would fit great in a place like Dallas. Like, if Dallas was thinking about trading Porzingis for Vucevic, that might not be the worst idea in the world, just because you get some more consistency in terms of your age is kind of, or sorry, not your age, your injury history is so bad with Kristaps. So, yeah, sure, you're maybe trading to a worse player, but you're trading for a guy who's more consistently in the lineup in Vucevic, and a guy who would play really well with Luka, because they have kind of a similar skill set in some ways, where they're both great passers and they both see the floor really well. Other places, the Lakers is far-fetched. I've seen some people mention how some way you could figure to get him to the Lakers if you sent like Kyle Kuzma and this and that to them, then you can match the contracts and somehow play it out that way. I don't see that happening, although it would be a really good get for them, because he could play well with Anthony Davis. There's just tons of teams out there that could use a guy like Vucevic right now, and he is rotting away on an Orlando team who's never been above 7th place in the Eastern Conference since he's been there. And he brings a lot to the table, and he consistently brings it night in and night out.
Yeah, like free this man from Orlando. Like he's been there longer than you think. He's been there for 9 seasons now, which is crazy. I thought he came into the league like 5-6 years ago, but he came into the league back in 2011, 2012. Like, man, like you got to really get this guy on a contending team. Like, I just feel so bad for him because he's not a good stats, bad team guy. Like, he genuinely puts up good stats. And like you said, he has the same offensive profile like Sabonis or Jokic, where put him on the high post, get the ball to him, and just let him be the hub of your offense. And even like a team like Milwaukee would really love a guy like him. Like, and you got to be thinking to yourself, like, why did we keep Brook Lopez? Like, he's barely doing anything this season. And even like the center position is thin. And I don't know if you're really looking for a center when you have Giannis. But I think having Vucevic, who's probably a better shooter than Lopez, and he can space the floor better, and even just a smarter center than Lopez probably would be a good fit for the Bucs. I don't know if they have the assets to trade for him. But man, this guy's 30 years old. He's probably in the middle of his prime, and he's going to decline a bit pretty soon. So, free this
Yeah,
guy.
it'll definitely be a situation where I think he's probably trying to work out a trade from Orlando just because, like, they got nothing going on. I mean, Markelle Fultz and Jonathan Isaac are probably a year away from actually being consistently contributing players again, just because they'll get back from injury in like 6 months, and then you have to restart that whole process of rediscovering your confidence and everything. But I saw something about getting Vooch to the Bulls. I don't know if that's feasible. The Bulls have a lot of talent, and they could pair him with LaVine. But again, LaVine and Vooch together, that doesn't scream championship to me. So it'll be a situation for him where there are going to be a lot of teams who want him. It's just a question to me whether the teams who want him can actually provide proper value for him.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to another guy, Harrison Barnes. I think Boston would be a good fit for him, but he's a good two-way forward who played in huge games. He can score, he can defend, and he's probably a forgotten player in the NBA. So, and if you're the Kings, you might even want to trade Heel too. Did we talk about this last podcast? But I think Harrison Barnes is a pretty interesting name and in the mix right now.
Yeah. Harrison Barnes is definitely another guy who's in the mix there. It's a situation where he is a good player. He's not a great player, but Sacramento might demand a great player's return for Harrison Barnes. And that's kind of where a lot of these deals get stuck. I think Buddy Hield is a more likely trade candidate there just because, yeah, we were saying before, I think Halliburton is going to be a starter there pretty soon. So, yeah, a team who is in need of shooting, in need of scoring off the bench, like there are tons of teams who could use a guy like him. The only situation that makes it difficult is that he's on a 4-year, $104 million contract, which is a lot of money to be paying out to a guy who's primarily just bringing shooting to your team. It's all going to be about how contracts match up at the trade deadline. And like even guys like Victor Oladipo, you've heard a lot of talk about Victor Oladipo being traded because he's not re-signing with the Rockets. And the toughest thing about this trade deadline is there aren't as many bad contracts out there as you would think for contending teams. Like a lot of these teams have kind of been pushing a younger group of guys you have Utah who's riding, like they've just handed out their contract to Donovan Mitchell and they just handed out their contract to Gobert. Or you have the Celtics who just signed Tatum, just signed Brown, and they don't really have any bad contracts on their team. Like Dallas got Luka still. Atlanta maybe is a destination where they could put some pieces together for a better player. That's a place to watch out for too as well. Atlanta could be a fire sale just because John Collins probably not going to be re-signed there, and they have so many contracts now that they could trade with Gallinari and all of those players where they could excel somewhere else. But we'll see. I think Atlanta will make a move at this trade deadline though.
Yeah. Okay, last one. Kevin Love. Is there still a market for him? Stretch 5, stretch 4. He's getting old, but I think he still adds a bit of value. But I think it's all about his injury history. So
Yeah.
Is there a market for Kevin Love?
The thing that changed his value is that LaMarcus Aldridge is available, because they're not exactly the same player. Like Kevin Love brings a bit more defensive versatility, because we've talked about this before. Like LaMarcus Aldridge does not move anymore. But still, LaMarcus Aldridge brings a lot of shooting for a big guy. And so, yeah, you could look for a stretch 4 in Kevin Love and pay $30 million a year for him. Or you could sign LaMarcus Aldridge off the waivers, which he'll probably be a buyout candidate for the Spurs soon.
Yeah, but I'd rather have a Kevin Love on my team than LaMarcus Aldridge, just because he's a bit smarter and he can move a bit more. Like Aldridge literally has his 2 feet just stuck in a brick of concrete. Like he just legit does not separate his feet at all. He just moves with 2 feet.
You better not talk too bad about him. He's going to end up returning to Portland.
Oh, no. I don't know. Actually, as a Blazers fan, we would welcome him for sure. But no way he's going to start. Like defensively, I don't think he's going to be that good, but I think he would be a good, high post guy. Handoffs to Damon CJ, and when he gets the ball, teams will sag on him, and he can hit those mid ranges all day. So I wouldn't mind Aldridge back to Portland.
Yeah, it'd be a nice reunion. His game is a little bit redundant with Carmelo, but it would still be a nice story.
No way you play him and Aldridge on the floor at the same time though if you're Terry Stotts.
Yeah, that's a defensive nightmare.
It is possible to. Yeah, but even having Melo and Cantor on the floor at the same time this season has just been a nightmare. Like they never move their feet. It is so horrible to watch. But yeah, having Aldridge would space the floor, but yeah, like we said, defensively he's just not there anymore. So, moving on. Let's just talk a little bit about college ball. And Nate, this is probably more of your segment than mine, just because you're probably following a lot of college ball more than me, especially since you're a Syracuse fan. So let's just start with Virginia, Kansas, and Duke. They all dropped out of the conference early. First time since 1976 that Duke and Kansas have both are not participating in the NCAA tournament. So what does this mean for the tournament, and how will it play out?
Sorry, I think you got the teams mixed up there. It's Duke and Kentucky who won't be in the tournament.
Oh, right.
Kansas
what do I know?
will probably
Right.
still be in the tournament.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen this coming all season. Like, there's been COVID problems around everywhere, and it's not really going to affect how the tournament plays out because, like we've seen, the NCAA doesn't. You can't care too much about what's fair to a team this year. And so, yeah, sure, Virginia had a case today, and they just lost that game, and Georgia Tech moves on to the ACC final. That's just going to be how it is. I mean, one team in the Sweet 16 is probably going to have a COVID case, and they're going to be knocked out of the tournament. And it's as simple as that, right? Like, it will come down to a point where teams are arguing about, oh, whatever, we have 7 healthy players, and the tournament is just going to decide that it's against their best interest to have this team play still. But they're going to get it done. And sports, time and time again during this year, has managed to get through. You know, like basketball got through. That was through the bubble, but football through to the Super Bowl, and baseball all the way through the World Series. They'll play it out. There will be a few teams who lose a game automatically, but in the end of the day, we'll get most of March Madness still. So it's a bad situation, and it feels terrible for some of these seniors especially. I mean, these guys who played at Duke had a terrible season, and then they're making a run at the end of the season, all to have it stopped by COVID. It's too bad, but it's just going to be how it is for the rest of this college basketball season.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just go through some rapid fire questions. I'm just gonna ask you a couple of questions here, and you're just gonna give your best answers. So, college basketball cheat sheet here. Teams to watch out for: Giant Slayers.
Yeah. Okay. So as we get into March, this is basically where everyone starts caring about college basketball, because it's probably the most enjoyable sports event of like all the sports events, just because it's so fast paced, buzzer beaters, everything. So Giant Slayers, this is a bunch of teams who basically are going to be lower seeded but have the makeup to make a big run in late into the brackets. So usually what you can expect is that a team will make a big run. A low-seeded team will make a big run if they have a big-time player, and we've seen that time and time again with UConn twice with Kemba and Shabazz Napier, and you just see that is a constant theme for teams making a big run who are low seeds. So I had a couple players here for teams who I think can make a big run and you should keep track of in your brackets this year. UConn, again, they come with a great guard who is peaking at the right time in James Bouknight. They're projected to be a 7 seed right now. They can make a big run in the tournament. Scotty Barnes, he's a player for Florida State who has really just he's projected to be a top pick this year in the draft. He's a great player. Florida State is, as always, a long defensive team. They can shoot the lights out this year. So that's a team, they'll probably be around a 5 seed. That's a team who can make a run to the Final Four. Probably the best team in the ACC all tournament or all year. And they might win the tournament. And then this one is a bit of a cheap one because they are a really good team. And this is the number 1 player in this year's draft, but Cade Cunningham for Oklahoma State. If you've gotten a chance to watch Oklahoma State lately, they've just been beating some big-time teams. Like, they've gone in, I think they beat Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Texas all in the same week, who are all top 20 teams. And Cade Cunningham just keeps finding a way to get it done in college. He is so much more advanced in his basketball IQ than most of the players in college. So that's another guy with the Oklahoma State Cowboys who you could watch out for making a deep run into this tournament.
Yeah, that I like watching Cade Cunningham play. Yeah, so next question. Higher seeds do you think will struggle?
When I'm looking at the high seeds this year, we have some really solid ones at the top. Gonzaga, Michigan, Illinois, all really good teams. But there are a few teams who I think will be disappointments this year. Number 1, this Villanova. I mean, they just lost their point guard. He tore his ACL, Colin Gillespie. He was a great player for them all year. Losing him meant losing a lot of leadership because he is a senior and he's been there and he knows the system. And they're going to struggle early on. I think they're projected to be a 4 seed. They could go out in that first game against a 13 seed who usually that is a more competitive matchup than people envision with a 4-13 matchup. The next one, West Virginia, they're going to be a 3 or 4 seed this year. People love the Big 12. They don't have really an elite defense this year, which is really interesting to say for a West Virginia squad who's always known to be very stout defensively. They just don't have as great of a defense this year. Their offense is streaky. They are a team who I think is a candidate to go out early. They don't really have a guy who's a great put the team on their back kind of player this year. They're more by committee. And then this last one, they should be a 2 seed in the tournament. Houston, they had a win over Texas Tech, a win over Wichita State. Those are their 2 biggest wins this season. They also lost to Wichita State, who's projected to be an 8 seed in the tournament right now. They have a couple of really good players, but they're just not very tested coming out of that AAC conference, and they're really going to have to probably peak right now, and they've been showing signs of struggle later in the season when they were so dominant to begin this season. So that's another team who I think could struggle this year, and you should watch out for when you're filling out a bracket.
Okay, last one, or kind of a two-sided question here. Teams who have really actually have a shot at the national championship this year, and probably the most obvious one is Gonzaga. They've been just winning like crazy. So are they the favorites to win, or do you think you're going to pick the field? And if who's going to be in that field who's actually going to contend and most likely to win that championship this year?
Yeah, so college basketball, I mean, even the top teams ever have like a 25% chance to win the tournament. That's not to say that Gonzaga doesn't have the best chance of any team, because they're so complete. I mean, they have Suggs, who he just looks so NBA ready in his first year. It's crazy. And then Drew Timme, and then
Corey
Kispert. Just, it's such a good big three. They all play within that West Coast offense so well that Mark Few has designed, and they just continually destroy teams. They don't just beat them, they destroy them. And they are going to be the favorite. I would give them a 25% chance of winning the tournament. So I go with the field overall, but they are the team for sure who's the most complete and for sure who has the best chance winning. But other teams that I give a shot that are interesting to me this year, Illinois, been really good all year. They had some tough losses, but the Big Ten was the best conference in basketball, or in college basketball this year. They have Player of the Year candidate Ayo Donosumu. He's averaged like 21 and 7 this year. He just plays. He's kind of a man among boys. He just plays so aggressively, and he can get to the basket with ease. And then there's Michigan, who has over the years kind of been in the conversation. I mean, they had a good team 2 years ago. And then this year they have a lot of their guys, Isaiah Livers, Franz Wagner, who's the brother of Mo Wagner. Then just they're a by-committee team, but they also have, like I mentioned, Franz Wagner has been one of the top players in college basketball this year. And it will be interesting to watch this team just because they've beaten so many good teams in the Big Ten, and they're really tested. And then my last throw-in team, I'd kind of mentioned them before, but I think UConn is a very interesting team because they have very explosive scores across the perimeter, and they have a good perimeter defense. And I think that when you're looking at filling out your bracket, usually you want to pick a 5 or 6 seed to go quite a ways. And I think UConn is that pick where you could slot them in the Final Four, and I don't think anyone would really be surprised by that. So,
yeah, that's some great insight, Nate, for those who really aren't too much into college basketball. But before we end, I kind of want to talk about just college basketball in general. And I think for the common basketball fan, of course, you're more gravitated towards the NBA, and just because of all the stars and all the dunks and all the threes, the buzzer beaters and all that. But I think people often forget how good college basketball is, and how it's so important to even just the game of basketball in general, just because you have guys who aren't competent individually, and that causes them, compared to NBA players, and that causes them to play more team basketball. And especially from us who come from high school basketball, you really appreciate just really how that has been even just moved into college basketball, the way the ball is moved, the way people play defense, even just the energy on the court. It's just unmatched like than any other league, and more than the NBA, right? And so what if you're trying to convince someone who watches the NBA, go watch college basketball, how would you convince them?
Well, I think March Madness does a good enough job at convincing people for the most part.
Yeah.
It is kind of hard to get into college basketball outside of March Madness. Like when you get to March, it's so exciting with all the buzzer beaters. There's games throughout the day, but the things that have changed about the NBA over the years, where they've gone away from post play, they've gone away from mid range almost entirely. They've kind of stayed consistent in college ball. College ball is different in that there is competitive defense throughout the entire game. Like the kids who are playing college don't take a minute off because it's for a lot of them, it's their last 4 years of playing basketball. They don't have a career ahead of them. They're not trying to like take rest days or load manage. It's so exciting because every game means so much when you're watching college, and a lot of these kids are just fighting for a chance to get into that tournament. And there's so many teams who, like my favorite team, the Syracuse Orange, every year, every single game is important because they're always on the bubble, and you always have to wonder what they're going to be able to do this year and if they're going to end up in the tournament. And it's kind of that, like every game is more meaningful, and they play such a team-centric basketball that there's always going to be more intensity throughout the game. And there are so many buzzer beaters throughout March Madness. Almost every game is close. The 1-and-1 free throw is awesome because if they miss the first one, like the comebacks they're so epic because you can go and miss the front end of a 1-and-1 and not have another chance. And like it's so strategic in the way that NBA is like you just let Kevin Durant go to work, whereas college is running plays and getting open shots and working together as a team. So that's why I really enjoy watching college basketball.
Yeah, and I think I would argue that college basketball is more competitive than the NBA because you have guys who are literally playing for their lives. They're playing to get noticed. And guys in the NBA, like, sure, they're competing for a title, but like a lot of them are like, hey, we're already here on the big stage. We made it. This is like the end goal of my life. So, and that causes some guys to just kind of slack off. And that's why you sometimes just see guys not play defense because they know they're good enough just to get a bucket on the other end, right? And so, yeah, I agree in terms of just college ball and how entertaining it is, even just before March Madness, like even the mini tournaments leading up to them, like even like Syracuse lost in a buzzer beater, and I know you're heartbroken from that a couple of days ago, but it is very enjoyable, and when you really want to learn the X's and O's of team basketball, like there's no way you learn from the NBA because clearly you cannot replicate what guys do there because they're too skilled, and so rather you should watch the X's and O's of a college basketball game because teams don't really rely on one guy all the time to just go get a bucket, post up, we'll go 1-on-1, and it really is a team-oriented game. And I think, yeah, just your love for Syracuse, and I think it's pretty similar to my love for the Blazers, where they're both teams that aren't the top dogs in their respective leagues, but they have something in them, and they're always on the bubble, like you said, and it's just so fun to watch teams like them just compete. And just because there's going to be adversity going to hit them because they're so bad at this, they're so bad at that, and it's just all the ups and downs that come with a team during the season is just so fun to watch, and being a part of that, it just makes and being a part of that roller coaster team is just so entertaining and so fun. And when you put your mind to just watching these games and just following these teams like wholeheartedly, it just makes it so much more fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love to sweat on Selection Sunday when Syracuse is the last team in the field, but that'll be the case again this year. So yeah, I mean, get out, go and watch some college ball, and it'll be on, I think it starts on Friday next week, and Selection Sunday is this Sunday, but it should be super exciting this year. There'll be a lot of teams missing a player or two from COVID, and that could really shake things up. So we'll see how it plays out this year.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a show to get into college basketball, I recommend watching Last Chance U. On Netflix, they just released a series on East LA Community College, in LA, and it just gives you a great insight on just the culture of guys who actually played D1 basketball, but they had to drop down because of their grades or whatever, and they're playing in junior colleges, and they're trying to get back up into that college level of D1. And I think it just documents really the culture of the competitiveness of each player just trying to make their name for themselves and trying to make it to the big stage. But have you heard of Last Chance?
No, I saw. I mean, I've watched some of the football one, but I saw that the basketball one came out.
Yo, it's really good.
Yeah.
It happened right before COVID too, so like I think they're right into the playoffs, but it's really good. Like you just create a bond with those players. You start loving those guys. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to start watching that.
Yeah, it's a good show. I highly recommend. But anyways, yeah, that does it for this week's edition of the pod. Had so much fun talking about college ball in the NBA. Things are going to ramp up soon in March and heading into May. We'll sure to be talking about playoffs very soon because the season's coming to an end. We're heading towards the second half now. So yeah, shoot us some questions if you have any. But until then, we'll see you next episode.